Hello once again, fellow modeling and tabletop wargaming enthusiasts. Welcome to the Mediocre Modeler Show. Today we're going to try our very first painting tutorial. This is going to be kind of interesting to see how this works out, but we are going to work on a 28mm bolt action figure, Conflict 47, bolt action, chain of command, whatever, 28mm World War II style game you want to play. So we're going to kind of show the steps that I go through. We're not going to focus on every single brush stroke, but we're going to talk about the colors and some of the techniques. So on taking this miniature from bare metal up to fully painted. So without any further ado, let's head on down to the bench and see how this goes. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our very first painting tutorial here on the channel. This should be interesting to see how this turns out. So here we have an almost complete officer for bolt action. This is one of the old white metal sculpts for the American command figures. We have our little captain here, is denoted by the two bars on his helmet. This is almost done, just needs a matte varnish and then basing, but you can kind of see everything that we've got done with that one so far. But we have our next one all ready to go. He's been glued to his base. We've got our basing material applied, kind of cleaned up some of the flash and mold issues and everything. I mean, it's just a part of white metal casting. And these two are actually from the same box set. They're from the American Support box set. So it did also include the 30 cal machine gun, the mortar, the radio operator / spotter, as well as the medic. So very first thing we're going to do with this is we're going to get a coat of primer on it. Just be using some good old-fashioned Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch 2X in flat black. I like to use flat black. It's just what I've gotten used to using. I've tried a lot of airbrush primers, and frankly, after the millionth time of trying to get Stynylrez to go through an airbrush, I just gave up and went back to primer cans. So we're going to go ahead and get a coat of that on here, let that dry, and then we will be back to move on with the next step. All right, we have got our coat of primer on our little infantry officer here. The primer doesn't always cover perfectly over white metal, so what I like to do is usually hit it with a coat of flat black acrylic. I just used Vallejo model color in this particular instance. So we're going to go ahead and get started painting on this guy. So we're going to use a number of different brands of paint. We've got some Games Workshop, some Vallejo, some Scale 75, and we'll go through all of those shortly as we get through each step, and there should be a list of all the paints used down in the description. But first, we're going to use a couple of colors from this Scale 75 US Army uniform set. So we're going to start with his trousers. We're going to be using the US dark brown and the US medium brown, SW50 and SW51 from this uniform set. These two right here. And then we're going to use just a little bit of good old-fashioned talent in a bottle, a little Nuln oil, or any other black wash that you might like. If you happen to have some of the Vallejo Game Wash black wash, that would work as well, or it's just as well as any of the other paint sets out there. And I'm going to be using a Winsor & Newton professional watercolor sable size 1. These are actually a really nice brush for the money. They are still Kolinsky sable from Winsor & Newton, but they are about half the price of the Series 7. So if you're looking for some affordable, high quality brushes, definitely check out these Winsor & Newton professional series. So we need to get a little bit of our first color down on the palette. We're going to use this Warfront from Scale Color US Dark Brown, SW51. Just give that a quick little shake. We're going to get just a little bit on the palette here. Now, as with most Scale Color paints, it tends to be fairly thick right out of the pot. So we're going to actually, as with any paint, we're going to mix a little water into her. You don't need to see the palette too close. I am using a wet palette here. I always like to use the wet palette. This is something I haven't always done. I used a well palette and some flow improver, like a 10-to-1 mix of flow improver or flow aid for many, many years, and had great results. But since switching to an actual wet palette, things have just gone better. And I do actually keep 3 pots of water on my desk, on my bench, one for general cleaning, one for cleaning metallics, and then another for mixing and thinning. So we'll kind of get that into a little consistency that we like here. Just about there. Again, the scale 75 paints are fairly thick right out of the pot, but they do have some excellent coverage. So I think we're pretty close to where we want to go there. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of start with his trousers here. So this is my first time ever trying to paint on camera, so apologies if we're missing anything here. Just questioning if I used the right color of paint. And I think I did. It's just going down a little brighter than I anticipated, and that does happen. It always tends to come on a little bit brighter, but then as things dry, they will darken up. And it is going on just a little bit thin, and that's perfectly fine. That's how we would like it. You always want it to go on a little thinner. You can always add additional coats. And of course, seeing as this is our first color, I'm trying to be fairly careful. That's just what I do. But you can be a little more messy at this stage because everything after this is going to get covered by another color. So once we have got all of this applied, we will be back for our next step. All right, we have finished the first coat of our US, actually not the first coat, our first color. We have several coats of that US dark brown on the trousers. The lighting kind of makes it look a little bit more reddish than it really is. But we'll take care of that in just a moment. But you can see just how well that nice flat finish from those scale 75 paints turns out. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to hit this with a wash, a black wash. In this case, we're going to be using some good old-fashioned Nuln oil. And I have actually switched to an older, more beat-up brush. Again, it is a Winsor & Newton professional series, but this one's just kind of a little bit more beat up, so I like to use that for the washes. Kind of once I fail to maintain a brush is when I will move to using it for washes and other things like that. So we'll just go ahead and get a good amount on our brusher, as you do with washes and contrast paints, and we're just going to kind of put this all over the trousers there. Now, generally, if you were trying to speed paint, you'd find a wash that would work for all your colors, so you could base coat all of your colors at once and then just wash over everything once. But since this is kind of a leader unit, I tend to take a little bit more time. But, you know, batch painting, you could do the same thing. I kind of haven't quite found that wonder wash. I'm still trying to work out my personal process for painting these sort of early mid-war-ish US Infantry. I'll be playing these mostly for Conflict 47, so I just thought it'd be kind of fun to do sort of the early war pants, and again, and also with that M1941 jacket. And of course, there we go, and we'll just set that aside to dry for a little bit. But I kind of like the idea of, you know, the war's raged on for this long, so maybe they had to bring some old stuff out of stock. And then here's again the example we used in the beginning of the video, the completed, almost completed, now he has had a matte varnish on. You can see just how, you know, darkened down those trousers have become. But we've also brought them back up with a few highlights. So if we kind of, be tough to compare with a wet wash on there, but you can see some similarities. But then also we did bring that back up with some additional highlights. So once this is dry, we're actually going to come back in, reestablish sort of our base tone, or our mid-tone here with the US dark brown, and then we'll finally finish up the trousers with some highlights from this US medium brown. So we'll just let this dry for a bit, and then we'll be right back. All right, as you can see here, our black wash has dried all over the trousers of our little officer here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and come back in with our base color, the US Dark Brown SW51. And we're going to go ahead and just start layering up certain areas of these trousers like here. And we're going to try and make sure we leave that wash in the folds. So it's going to be the same procedure as last time. We're going to get a little water in our brush and we're going to start thinning out our paint a little bit here. And if you haven't guessed, this has actually been being recorded over a number of sittings. This is at least the third sitting to work on this miniature, just to give paint time to dry, and because I'm working on this on weeknights, so this will probably take somewhere around a week or two to actually film painting just this one character. Now, we may not record every single brush stroke, but we'll try and get as much as we can to at least make it somewhat informative. So what we're going to do, again, kind of like we talked about, is we're just going to kind of hit those high points and then try and make sure we're leaving that wash in the recesses. So we'll just hit those, work on those high points around the cuff there, probably try and leave some of these smaller areas. You can see what looks kind of like a seam in his pants right about there, so we'll probably leave some of that in there. But then this big blotchy spot here, we're just going to go ahead and cover that all on up. So just nice and easy, no rush here. We can certainly have all the time we need to take care of this step. So we'll just go ahead and get this all taken care of, and then we will be back when this is all done and then apply our final highlight. All right, and we have finished bringing our base coat back up. You can see there's quite a few kind of nice folds in here for us to leave that shade into. Might have laid it on a little bit heavy because it darkened it down quite a bit, but that's okay. Not everyone is the same. Now, one little tip here is when you have areas like this underneath that are kind of shaded, or here on the inside of his legs, you can go pretty easy bringing the highlight or the base coat back up. Just give it a little bit of a touch, but you don't need to bring it up as bright as we have along here. So our next step is going to be to kind of give it basically an edge highlight with this US Medium Brown SW50. I've already got a little bit on the palette, so we'll, as always, kind of go with our usual method. And I did switch to a smaller brush. I am using a Professional Series size 0, just for a little bit more control on the highlights. Again, get our paint kind of thinned out. We don't want it too thin at this stage because then it could run over, but of course we want it thin enough that it'll flow off the brush without any difficulty. So this should be a relatively short process. We'll just go ahead and find kind of all of our high points here and kind of just gently lay in that highlight there. Just a little bit of a line there. We don't necessarily need to worry about some of the folds here like we've got right under the sling and then under here, because those would mostly be in shadow anyway. Wouldn't get much of a large direct highlight, kind of like we have with some of these others. I apologize if excuse me, if I kind of lose you with the painting handle here. The camera is offset a little bit compared to my view, so I'm trying to make sure I'm keeping everything in frame here and not losing anything, but I'm not always succeeding. But that's one of those things that kind of comes with practice, much like highlighting and painting. So we'll just kind of continue on here, kind of get our main highest edges here. It is a little bit difficult to get my brush right where I need it to with this ring light in the way. I tell you, that's one thing I never thought I would be owning, is a ring light. I'm all ready to start my own OnlyFans. Ha ha ha. So this should be a fairly simple process here. Shouldn't take us terribly long to get these last highlights in. And then we'll be ready to move on to our next color. Still not quite decided on what part we're gonna do next. We could do his jacket, that good M1941 jacket, or we might do the skin. But we might move on to his undershirt and jacket before doing that. Just want to make sure we get a nice complete highlight there, and then sort of on this little seam line that we've got on the top of his trousers there. And then of course we want to get the opposite side of that. Nice little line there. And of course, if you overdo it a little bit, you can always clean up any happy little accidents with your base color. Still nice and wet on the palette. That is one of the nice bonuses of using a wet palette, is it will keep your paint dry, or it won't keep your paint dry longer. It will keep your paint wet just a little bit longer if you need to go back in and touch something up. So we're really not trying to cover anything in its entirety at this stage. We're just trying to get that nice little bit of a highlight in there. And again, I apologize for the extra background noise. It is fairly warm for April here in the central upper Midwest, but we are expected to have a high of 55 and rain the next day. Should be interesting for my 8-year-old soccer game. We'll see how that goes. Just kind of take your time, very gentle. Always better to err on the side of caution, maybe have a little bit maybe just not enough paint on your brush than too much. Better to have a little bit too little. And of course it might look a little bit bright right now, but once that dries it will darken down. And then once we do our final weathering and we get our oil wash on it, will help kind of tone those down. And if it still is too bright, you can always go back in and kind of glaze it down a little bit with your base color. Or add another wash, kind of a targeted wash if you wanted. That tends to kind of help blend things in quite a bit. Just 1 or 2 more little spots here to do. And we are almost finished getting our highlights on. This little segment here definitely turned out being a little bit longer than I had anticipated, but that's okay. We're all in this for the long haul, right? So I kind of like these Citadel painting handles more than I ever thought I would. I'm so used to just using wine corks. They're just so much smaller. There's a bit more surface area to hold on to with one of these, and it makes it a little bit easier to, say, turn your model upside down in order to reach a more difficult area. And of course, probably need to get some more paint. Just a little bit more, make this last a little bit. There we go. I'd say those trousers are looking pretty good. So I think up next we're probably going to start on that jacket, but we'll move on to that next. Next up on our little duder here, we're going to do a couple of things. So first we're going to work on the little bit of his shirt that you can see, and for that we're just going to use a little bit of Vallejo model color US olive drab 7887, and then we're going to work on that M1941 jacket. And to do that, we're going to use some Vallejo model color khaki 7988. Those are of course the colors I have. They may not be perfectly historically accurate, but they should be good enough. So we'll go ahead and get that on there, and then we'll come back, show you guys what it looks like after those colors are on. And there we have a base coated shirt and jacket. See, took a couple coats of Vallejo model color khaki to get that good coverage, but that's just fine as always. We like those nice thin coats. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna hit that with a wash. Now I like Citadel Seraphim sepia, however you want to call it. But you can use any sepia colored wash you like. There's also Vallejo Game Wash. I kind of like Seraphim Sepia a little bit better. It doesn't stain quite as much as the Vallejo wash does. So that's what I like to use. So we're just gonna do our traditional wash method. So we'll get a bit on our brush here. Try not to go too crazy, but we'll get a good amount on here just to really get things worked in. And then we're gonna go ahead and just get that worked on. We're gonna work that over his shirt as well as all of the jacket as well. And once that's dry, much like the steps we followed with his trousers, we'll go ahead and come back in with that base coat, sort of reestablish that mid-tone, and then we'll go ahead and bring up that highlight. So we'll go ahead and get this wash applied, and then once that is dry, we'll get that base coat back on. So we'll bring you on back. We'll come on back to once we've got this wash on. As you can see here, we have finished up the jacket and moved on to a few other things. Just decided we'd try and knock out a few things at once. So we got the jacket brought back up to the base coat, and we gave it the highlight. So we had our base coat with Vallejo khaki, and we gave it a sepia wash, brought it back up with the khaki, and then a final highlight of scale 75 Thar Brown, SC61. For his shirt there, that little bit of the shirt you can see was, of course, the Vallejo US Olive Drab with a khaki highlight. And then went ahead and did his gaiters down there on his boots. So for a base color, we used Desert Yellow, again from that Warfront set, that SW31. Gave it a sepia wash, of course. So we probably could have done this the same time, saved ourselves a washing step as the jacket, but we're all good. And then once we brought that back up again with the Desert Yellow, we gave it a highlight of Mojave White, scale color SC62. So I think what we're going to do next is we're actually going to do his skin tones. So the face, hands. From there, everything else should use just a single wash. So we'll do his helmet and the strap on there. We'll do the walkie-talkie, the wood and metal and the sling on his Thompson, and then of course get his boots, and then we do have his magazine pouch as well as sort of the messenger bag there as well. So we'll take care of all of those before we give them a wash, so we'll come back once those are base coated. Now we have all of our base coats complete, so you can see we've done some Vallejo chocolate brown on his boots, on the wood parts of his Thompson, on the front handguard, as well as a little bit of the buttstock here at the back. For all of his webbing, his little satchel and his magazine pouch, we used USA Dark Green or US Dark Green from Vallejo. We actually used USA Olive Green or Olive Drab for his helmet, as well as his handheld radio here. A little bit of Vallejo Flat Brown for the sling, as well as the straps on his helmet. Kind of a nice reddish brown. We'll kind of bring that up to just like a reddish leather kind of color. So that takes care of all of our base coats. So what we're going to do from here, we also did the skin. So got the skin all taken care of, so his face and his hands, which is actually done using some contrast paint, one of my little tips and tricks for making skin tones just a little bit easier. So now that we've got all the base tones done, base coats on, we're going to basically hit everything that we haven't highlighted already with some black wash, and then we'll bring everything back up from there. So we'll go ahead and get that black wash on, and we'll come back after and take a look. And there we have a nearly painted miniature. So we went ahead and we worked up those boots again with some of that base color, and then gave it a little highlight of flat brown, which we used again to come in here, bring the mid-tone back up on the sling with a little Doom Bull brown for the reddish leather part, so also the straps on his helmet. We used our USA Dark Olive or Olive Drab to do his radio as well as his helmet, and then a little dry brush of khaki on top of the helmet just to give it a little bit of color. And then for our webbing and pouches, we used that USA Dark Green with then a little highlight of Vallejo Green Gray. Used Vallejo German Gray to do the bits on his Thompson there, as well as we used that chocolate brown to get a little detail on, or bring up that mid-tone again on the wood furniture on the Thompson. We do need to highlight that still a little bit. I forgot about that. Did do the eyes on his face. I normally don't like to paint eyes, but these just kind of feel like they need it. And then of course we got his silver bar for a first lieutenant there on his helmet. So we're not quite done yet, because I do need to highlight a few minor things that I just realized, but I do want to give it a gloss coat because I do have a couple of decals that I want to put on. So we will get to that shortly, but just wanted to give you guys a look at where we're at currently. So we'll go ahead and hit this with a gloss coat and get ready for decals. Now that we have our gloss coat applied, you can see just how shiny our little first lieutenant is here. It is one of my favorite times of a paint job, and that is, of course, decal time. So right here, we've got a decal sheet from Company B Models for the 2nd Infantry Division. You can see we've got our American flag, we've got our 2nd Infantry Division symbol, as well as various rank insignias. But we're just going to be using the American flag, which isn't strictly necessary, but I'm going to use it anyway. And then, of course, our divisional patch. And in order to make this a little bit easier, decals can be sometimes a little bit tricky for some people. We're going to use a couple of different things here. Got a couple of different products. So, of course, we're going to use some microset, and then we're going to use some solvaset. A lot of people like to use microsol, which is perfectly fine. However, I have been stuck on solvaset, which is basically high-octane microsol for years. You know, back in my scale modeling days, this stuff it's rocket fuel for decal solution. You got to be a little careful with it, but it will settle down decals that don't want to settle down with anything else. So, of course, we have a number of other different tools. We've got our X-Acto knife, a pair of tweezers will come in handy, and then I've got a brush for applying and helping move things around and smooth things out, and then a couple of Q-tips just to kind of help things go along. And of course, I've got my little dish of water here poking its head in. Obviously, you'll need that with water slide transfers, decals, decals, whatever you want to call them. So one thing to take note of when you get decals, usually from smaller manufacturers, you can kind of see that sheen across the entire sheet. The decal film covers the entire sheet. So a lot of larger manufacturers where decals are their main thing, they'll just have the decal film covering just the decal itself. But in this case, it covers the entire sheet. So one thing you need to pay attention to when you're doing decals like this is you need to cut pretty closely around the outline of the decal. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a lot of extra carrier film that might be difficult to blend in. You can kind of see, you know, on this one, I just did a nice little cutout of the divisional insignia. So we're going to go ahead and get those applied, and then we'll be back once everything is dry and nicely formed to the model. And there we have our decaled miniature. We've got our 2nd Infantry Division divisional patch, as well as our American flag there. And then we have put a second coat of gloss over that for our next step, which is going to be a oil wash. I like to actually mix my own, just using some artist oils. You can also get the pre-made stuff from MIG or Ammo, but I've just got several tubes of old Winsor & Newton Winton artist oils. I use raw umber a lot. Just mix it up with a little bit of odorless mineral spirits, and then we'll apply that. So we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll be back as soon as that wash is on and dried. There we have it, folks. There is our completed lieutenant. So this is all painted, oil washed, got a matte varnish on it. The only thing left to do is the basing, and that'll be a pretty simple affair. One thing extra I did kind of do, and you might see here on his face there, we got a little stubble, and I actually learned a little sort of a cheat last night from Sonic Sledgehammer Studio. Great channel, definitely check that out. Use some Apothecary White contrast paint, and as you can see, that turned out pretty well, and definitely from that distance, it definitely looks like he's got some pretty good stubble. So we'll go ahead and get this based up and then get the final product for you. There we have it, folks. Here is our completed first lieutenant. All matte varnished up and based as well with some Woodland Scenics flocks and a little Army Painter flower tuft there. Everything turned out pretty nice. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that. It was interesting to try and film that. I'm definitely not used to trying to paint through the camera or over the camera, so I apologize if there's not a lot of actual in the process of painting shots that you might prefer, but we'll figure it out as time goes on. So if you have any suggestions or anything for content or things to make it easier to get through, just let me know. I'd be more than happy to hear them. So as always, you can check the channel description to get all of the information for how to reach out. And until next time, folks, may your paints be thin, your brushes be pointy, and your dice be hot.